Hi. So this is the third video of our course, and I think for each week I'm going to try and make a video that discusses some particular aspect of the previous lecture. So in this video I'd like to talk about transaction costs, which we discussed last week, in which Coase identified as a rationale both for firms and for the limiting size of firms. Now, what kind of transaction costs are there? Well, I'm going to talk about three categories of transaction costs, and then I'd like to discuss a fourth hidden transaction cost category. So the first set of transaction costs are search and information costs. There can be costs incurred in identifying possibilities for mutual gains, and there can be costs for finding appropriate funding sources, stakeholders, and gathering information. So in your firm, you need to decide, who can I work with in order to make a profit? Within a firm, the answer is easy. It's just your employees. Whereas in the marketplace, you need to find freelancers or other firms who are going to either supply you with primary inputs or use your output to create other goods or to bring to end consumers. Who will I sell my products to? Both the firm and the market can produce final goods which they sell in the marketplace, but the firm or in the market, you can also produce intermediate goods. So some goods, such as this phone, are sold to the end user, to the consumer. But there's many components within the phone: semiconductors, resistors, logic boards, batteries, which aren't used for themselves, but they're used to make something else. So these intermediate goods could be passed on within the firm towards the end of making the final good. So a semiconductor firm may make and sell semiconductors to different companies. Samsung, for example, makes memory chips, and those memory chips are used in a wide variety of devices. But Samsung is also vertically integrated. So those memory chips that Samsung uses are also then sold within the company to itself to make its own phones. So sometimes when you manufacture intermediate goods, you can find the place to sell them is the marketplace. But if you're vertically integrated, then you can avoid those transaction costs and also conduct the transaction internally where you use those intermediate goods for production of your final good. Similarly, how should I finance the project that I'm going to undertake within the company? In the marketplace, there's always the option of external funding, but again, within a firm, there could potentially be internal options as well. Okay. The second type of transaction costs are bargaining and decision costs. So costs that are associated with negotiating an agreement. Within a firm, we have the advantage that we have employees, we know who we're going to work with, but the negotiation of employment contracts and the maintenance of HR departments and internal admin and internal organization decisions are all costs associated with operating a firm, with providing for our workers and managing our employer-worker relationship. In the market, there's also some admin, but there's much less. Holidays typically don't need to be discussed, neither do working hours. Instead, supplier negotiations focus on what's relevant for the firm, which is what is the price of the good, the quality of good, and the delivery schedule for the good that's being manufactured. And of course, there has to be a discussion, and sometimes it's implicit, sometimes it's explicit, or what are the remedies for cases of unfulfilled contracts. And the third type of transaction costs that we typically encounter, which is quite prominent, are policing and enforcement costs. So just like in the previous section where we talked about what happens if the contract isn't fulfilled on time, within a firm, there can be internal discipline, there can be promotions as a reward or firing as a stick for costs involved in making sure that all parties stick to the agreement. In the market, we instead need some sort of external discipline. So it can be through courts, arbitration. Sometimes there's a renegotiation of the contract because the contract wasn't satisfied or it's not on schedule. Right now, we can see that there's a lot going on with the production of vaccines for COVID. And as it makes sense, it turns out that it's a very difficult process to make vaccines, and there's difficulties in the manufacturing process. And perhaps these contract disputes could be resolved over time through courts, but that would be an extremely lengthy process. And so instead, governments are trying to negotiate or renegotiate with firms on a case-by-case basis. Now, the other type of enforcement tends to have to do often with moral hazard. You want your employees to work hard, and it's difficult to guarantee that they work hard. And you'd like the product, the quality that they produce to be of high quality. So within the firm, there's managerial expenses to monitor the effort and production quality of the products. Often when you purchase in the marketplace, there's some sort of external quality control. So there's different kinds of certifications. I can look on the back of this phone again, and I can see that there's different FCC certifications, regulations that are met. And these ISO and CE certified for Europe certifications tend not to be regulatory, but they tend to be satisfied by most electronic manufacturers to exhibit quality to end users. So it's something voluntarily that they pay for to have the product certified. Now, I used to work at Credit Suisse for a small amount of time. And actually, when I was there, I worked for a team that does proprietary trading. So what that means is that we have some models based upon how we think stock prices are going to move, and we trade with the firm's own capital using those models. And when we trade, there's one thing that's very important, and that was actually my responsibility to try and manage, was the transaction costs. So there's hidden transaction costs when you trade stocks, because if you're going to buy 10% of a small stock, you will have a big price impact on the stock. And when you buy the stock, and some of it's available at 50 pounds, you buy that at supply, some of it's available at 51 pounds, some of it's available at 52 pounds. The more you buy, the more you influence the price of the stock. And the price moves against you because you buying the stock makes it more expensive for you to buy it. And similarly, when you sell the stock, you make the price less. So the more you sell the stock, the less valuable is your current holdings, which you're still interested in selling. So I, have seen algorithms which work very well in theory, but whose profits are more than eaten up by the transaction costs. Often the profits can be quite small, something on the order of 50 or 60 bips, which is like a percentage of a percentage. And the transaction costs are also often small, unless you're engaging in very large transactions. But when you have a small gain and a small benefit on a large volume, it matters a lot whether or not the gain outweighs the cost. To partially combat this, there's within the financial industry there's dark pools of liquidity. So often when you need to buy or sell a large block of a stock, you don't participate in open market transactions where you go to the stock exchange and place your order, but instead you work with a bank or some other liquidity provider, and you negotiate a price with them, and then you make the transaction with them. And then they, for example, might either retain the block, maybe they have somebody else that they're going to sell it on to, or maybe they'll slowly offload it onto the market over time. So you can sell your stock slowly over a long period of time and not have such a large price impact as you would placing a large order at once. Or perhaps the liquidity provider would like to hold a position because it counters some other position that they hold or they believe in the position. Okay, so that's a kind of hidden transaction cost, but it can make all the difference in the world. And tomorrow is going to be Friday, and we'll talk about externalities then. So I look forward to seeing you then, and have a good Thursday. Bye.